This podcast is part of the Blueberry Network, where listeners and podcasters come together. Find out more at blueberrywithnoease.com.
The Eat Sleep Right podcast is brought to you by generous grant from the Built on Dreams Media Network, with additional funding by the Sims Media Foundation, and from the generosity of listeners like you.
Stand by, please. Rolling on set. On set.
Welcome to episode 123 of the Eat Sleep Right podcast. I'm your host, Adam Scull. The Eat Sleep Right podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download at audibletrial.com/Eat Sleep Right. Over 100,000 titles to choose from for your Kindle, iPhone, iPad, or MP3 player. The Eat Sleep Right podcast is available on the site as well as the iTunes store, where you can also subscribe to it. My goal is to find out how writers became authors, how they got where they are, how they do what they do, and go from a blank piece of paper to a finished manuscript. EatSleepRight.net is also made possible by the generous cooperation of Writers World Facebook group. Join the Writers World Facebook group. Learn how to become a better writer. If you enjoy the Eat Sleep Right podcast and you've had your own adventures in writing, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me about yourself and your story, and I may get back to you and have you as a guest on the Eat Sleep Right podcast. If you have any questions or comments, anything at all, I'd like to hear from you. The email address is comments@eatsleepright.net. Rachael L. McIntosh, welcome to the Eat Sleep Right podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I want to take a moment to read the synopsis of your first book in your series, Security Through Absurdity, Little Yellow Stickies. Jocelyn McLaren is a beautiful, hard-working yet naive visual artist who, through a twist of fate, ends up working for a major U.S. defense contractor during the lead-up to the Iraq War. She unknowingly witnesses and unwittingly participates in crimes that haunt her and are ultimately interlinked with the most nefarious psychopaths on the planet. How in the world did this come as a topic for you to write about? I mean, this is not your everyday fiction game plan.
Because I've lived it. I was an artist living in Boston, painting, and had opened up my own art space. I came down with multiple sclerosis. At that point, I ended up getting married because the guy had health insurance. At that point, we moved to Connecticut. We struggled for a while until he said, look, you've got to get some sort of job. And the first job I got was at this defense contracting office. They were quickly acquired by one of the big 6 defense contractors. I moved up through the ranks there just because I knew how to use email. I saw a lot of stuff during this transitional time for this company. That's how I made my living for a while. But it wasn't until very recently that I thought about what I had seen, and I said I should write a book.
Can you talk about what you saw or experienced that drove you to write a book?
The event that sparked this whole thing off was that I attended the Republican National Convention. I didn't think about working at the defense contractor when I was there. It was almost like I avoided the fact that I was working for a defense contractor. I would dress up almost as if it was a play, and I'd go in and I'd play the part. And that went on for a long time until I had my children. I realized I didn't like the way things were going in the country. I didn't like the way the economy was going. I didn't like a lot of these things. And I thought the only way to solve that was to be involved with politics. So I spent a lot of my time spreading the word. I ended up getting elected. I went to the RNC, and I saw how staged the thing was. And I should have known this because this was part of my job at the defense contractor. And when I came home, I was so shaken up by that experience. I think I literally had a breakdown. I just sat down and started typing about what happened. And I said, why did I even spend that time and money to get to the RNC? And then it brought me back to the defense contracting office. And I said, oh my God, I saw a lot of stuff there that really is making the news now and that people are freaking out about. I should definitely write a book about this. That's what made me write the book.
You have 3 books out now. Mm-hmm. Have they all been published, or what's the time frame for them?
The first book was published at the end of May. The next book is called Bubbles Will Pop, and that will be, I wanted it out for September 11th, but it'll probably be out sometime October. And then the last book, chances are now, will be January of next year.
You originally wrote this all as one book.
Yeah, one Mama Guancha. I just sat down, and every night after I put the kids to bed, I'd type, and it was typically around 2:30 in the morning when I would finish. The next day I'd start up all over again, and it took almost 2 years. When I handed in to the publishers, they said, we want you to do 3 things. We want you to use a pen name. We want you to get a life insurance policy. You gave us 4.8 novels. We're going to break it into a trilogy. So that's what happened.
When they said all this to you, you must have been glowing.
No, not really. I was more astounded. I'm not a writer. The only writing that I'd ever done was for grant proposals for my art and for the defense contractor. I thought that what I wrote, I didn't even know if that was enough for a novel. So when they told me that, I was like, oh, I'm sorry. That's what I said. I said, oh, I'm sorry.
Tell me a bit about your background and how it helped you write your books.
I guess because I'm an artist, I wanted to express this the way I was feeling in such a way that people would understand it. I've done a lot of paintings. I've done some performance art.
You belong to any writing groups?
No. This is me sitting at my computer every single night till 2:30 in the morning.
What would you like people to know about you and your books?
Despite a lot of adversity that I've seen and had to deal with MS and everything else, and looking at the country as it is right now, despite that, I am an upbeat person because we have things like the internet, like this podcast, that we can talk to each other about these issues. This book, I made it specifically just so that people would have a jumping off place to talk to each other about the stuff that I talk about in this book. I didn't want to scare people away with it being really politically, especially this first one. I didn't want to be about politics. That's why I separated it out and made it the 3rd book. This is specifically issues, specifically things that I experienced. I don't offer theories. I don't offer solutions. I just want people to recognize these are things that really happen to real people, namely me, but I've fictionalized it to be Jocelyn McLaren. I'm Rachael McIntosh. My character is Jocelyn McLaren.
What's the connectivity between book 1 and book 2?
The second book in the series, Bubbles Will Pop, that's when the character starts realizing things are not what she wants for her children. And she starts realizing that what she experienced in the first book, in Little Yellow Stickies, has impacted things that her children are going to deal with. And she wants to change that. So this is when she starts, her worldview starts widening in the second book. And she sees that there's other ways to do things.
Does your MS impinge on your writing abilities?
It comes and goes. I have relapsing, remitting MS, and there are times when it is horrible, when I am bedridden, and then it goes away. I'm lucky that I'm still at that stage. It's been about 20 years for me with this MS. One of the things that happened was really weird. You know how you have ASDF, JKL, semi when you're typing? One day, my fingers were completely backwards. Like if I did S, I actually typed a K. If I wanted to type an A, I would type an L. It was completely backwards. It was completely crisscrossed, but that went away. That was a very frustrating day.
It certainly sounds like you've got the upper hand with all of it.
I don't know. I guess it's just like for everyone. You just keep doing what you can do. And you just try to do it as best you can. That's really all there is to it. I don't know anything else, so I don't know what to compare it to.
Tell me about your joy of writing.
I love it. The joy, number one, is that it's therapeutic for me. It's like talking to a counselor, but for free. The other one is that I feel like I'm contributing to a larger body of knowledge about the world around us. When you're writing along, typing, and all of a sudden the story just takes off on its own. I love that. You sit back and you go, oh, I never thought that was going to happen. I've fallen in love, like literally in love with this character. He was just supposed to be in the background, like the conspiracy theory water cooler guy at the office. He now has become the ultimate hero in the 3rd book. He's awesome, and I loved when that happened.
Having worked for a defense contractor, how do you write what you know without writing about yourself?
That's why maybe this book was so easy to write. Because mostly I was writing about what I lived through, especially in the first book. The next book, it gets a little more fictionally with the characters because the auxiliary characters take on the life of their own. But by the third book, we get to that time, I also lived that part. I went to the RNC. I was so disgusted by what I saw. I dressed up in black funeral garb on the last day. I passed out cards. It was Washington's quote from his farewell address that said, "Beware political parties." I was so freaked out that this is what it had amounted to. I'm not trying to write a documentary. I wanted to write an enjoyable story that anyone could pick up and just enjoy. That was the whole point of my story.
Do you outline or do you write by the seat of your pants?
No, I just keep typing. It's in my head. When I just am sitting down, I see it like I'm watching a movie. And I stop and I close my eyes and I have to get into it as if I'm living it and feeling it. And then I type it out.
Like water pouring from a faucet.
Yeah.
Beginning, middle, or end? What's the most difficult? What's the easiest?
When I'm done with the book, when the editors have it and everything, and they say, okay, you're done, that's when I go back and rewrite the beginning.
After they tell you you're all done, and it's okay, you go back and edit on your own.
Yeah, and I go and I put the beginning in. In fact, the very first beginning is now almost the very end chapter of the third book.
Well, I think it's fair to say that you're a jumble of thoughts, and you just go right ahead and steamrolling no matter what the editors say.
Yeah, no, the editors, though, I have to give them credit because they really did help me a lot. Because it was such a big, big chunk, and we had to chop it into 3 books. The developmental editors really did help it along because we had to kind of take it theme-wise. Some of the stuff that appears in the third book ends up in the first book a little bit, and the third book, got to tie it back into that first book. So that developmental edit took a long time, and it was very, very worth it.
And revisions? Love them or hate them?
There actually wasn't a lot of revision to this. I don't really hate them. The biggest thing that would happen is the editors, especially in the first book, they didn't believe it. They thought that I was not believable in that the people that would read the book, they'd say this would never happen. I really had to slow it down and lay the groundwork for where I was and make it believable, make the whole thing believable for the reader. That was the number one thing with this first book. Because all this information that I'm putting out there, the editors I couldn't believe didn't believe me. They're like, no, but you've really got to just make it so that people understand where you were and what was going on so they can believe that this actually happened.
Are you traditionally published or self-published?
This book is through iUniverse, which is an imprint of Penguin, but it is self-published. When I sent it in, they did give me a chunk of money to pay for these editors. They knew that this book would be sellable at least once a year with 9/11. They invested in me.
How did that make you feel?
Good, but I still have to pay more money. You know what I mean? Doing all the marketing and all that stuff still.
Which leads me to the next question, which is, what's hardest, writing, editing, or marketing?
Marketing. When you're writing the book, you're in the zone, you're feeling it. I enjoyed sitting down, typing, and when you get it all done, you have a product, and you're all excited. Now it's got to go somewhere, and now you have to pick up the phone and do the uncomfortable thing of speaking to people and trying to condense this 2-year journey, mental journey that you just took, make other people want to even pick up the story that you did. That in itself is the scary part. It was quite enjoyable writing the book, but this part where you have to literally, I marched into the newspaper place maybe 3 times unannounced. They're going to do a feature on me at the Providence Journal. I live in Rhode Island, so the Providence Journal is going to be doing a feature story on me, but it took 3 months. You have to do that, I guess.
What do you want the reader to walk away with?
Good question. It's about the ideas that we have about the reality that we're living in. So much of that is pre-scripted, distributed to us via the media. With the internet and things like this podcast, you are able to see and experience other things that are not specifically pre-scripted anymore. Once your blinders kind of come off, you realize, wow, why were we even doing this? I feel like I'm in an amazing place right now. Without getting too sappy, but I feel like I'm in an amazing place right now because of this. Eventually, I hope my books will help people kind of move those blinders a little bit.
Complete the sentence. The writer's inner journey is...
what it's all about. For me, I had to get into that quiet spot in the middle of the night, halfway between dream state, half falling asleep, sit down and just channel it through. It was half memory and half dream state.
You love to write because
I have to. Right now, I think it's the best use of my creativity.
What do you like best about your primary character?
I like her in this book because she's not the typical, when you read these books about office-y things, usually the main character is some kick-ass woman who's handling business. This character is clueless. She's just clueless. But she does such a good job at her job, she keeps getting promoted. She's not a corporate native, and that's why I like her, because she's clueless. She doesn't know she's clueless, and she's trying really hard to be the part. She's a little snarky. In fact, the editors told me to cut down the snark.
Where can we find out more about you and your books on the internet?
Well, I do have a website. It's Rachael L. McIntosh. That's RACHAEL. Don't forget the second L. McIntosh. MCINTOSH. RachaelLMcIntosh.com.
Rachael L. McIntosh, author of Little Yellow Stickies, the first book in Security Through Absurdity series. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
If you're looking for a community that can offer you tools, support, and advice to start your own adventures in writing, then prepare to have the cauldron of your imagination stirred. I started the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast so more people can understand what it's like to be a writer and to get more eyes on your books. My goal is to help you achieve the success you so richly deserve. I salute your success in writing.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast, located at eatsleepwrite.net. Please send any questions, comments, or suggestions to comments@eatsleepwrite.net. Please consider a donation to support the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast. Donations can be sent to our PayPal address at donations@eatsleepwrite.net. Once in a lifetime, the theme music for the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast, courtesy of Stephen Paul, all rights reserved, used by permission. Please join us again for the next edition of the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast.